to pop in with another sketchbook idea that I just tried with my students and it actually worked really well. So it's based off of the concept of connect the dots, and what I did was really just put a lot of dots down on pages. And then we went over different ways to make up rules for how students would put together their connect the dots. So it's the same idea of kind of helping them conquer the blank page syndrome, and it's also a really good way to help them think about developing constraints. So for this first one that I showed to them is all of these dots were already down on the page, and as I looked over it, I decided my rules for this one was I was going to make a whole bunch of triangles, and the triangles couldn't overlap with each other. So I just went through connecting dots, figuring out all the places that I could have triangles. And I do know that I could close this one off here, but as I shared with my students, I liked having this opening so that it kind of flowed into the rest of the page. So I broke my rule on that one. Then to make it more interesting, and because we were talking some about mark making, I used different mark making techniques to fill some of it in. Using some cross hatching, just some lines, some dotted lines, which are a little bit hard to see there, and then coloring in some areas. So that is one example of a rule of how many triangles could I find. For this one, I decided to, because I looked over it, and I saw a lot of the dots were actually different sizes. So I decided I was going to try to connect using one line from the biggest dot to the smallest dot. So the beginning was actually pretty easy and kind of figuring that out, and I was doing a continuous line, so there's some overlap going on. But after I got through these couple, then they all kind of ended up being the same size. So I sort of abandoned that rule and then just quickly went through and connected some more, and again played with seeing how I would fill them in. So there's two things that I want you to see from this. One, I'm always starting with some kind of rule to get me going, and two, I'm willing to adapt that rule as needed, because sometimes when I get into it a little bit farther, I realize that rule isn't really totally perfect and I have to try something else. For this one, which actually ended up looking like a bunch of little dippers, I decided that I was going to do 6 dots. I wanted to connect 6 dots without any of the lines, excuse me, without any of the lines overlapping each other, and then it eventually closing. So that's how I got a bunch of these different shapes. So what I liked about it, it still gave me a clear guide that I was following. So there's definitely a lot of similarities in these, but there's still a lot of differences as well. So there's differences in the size and the shape of the triangle. There's differences in kind of how the handle turns out. Then these dots, they were left over. I couldn't continue to follow my rule with any of these because all of the dots I said could only be connected to one line. So since these were already reminding me of constellations, then I just kind of played off of that and made these almost look like abstract little stars. So there's really no right or wrong way to do these, but so one, you can predetermine them and make photocopies and give students pages with dots already put on them. You can have, I did decide I kind of like the frame around it, so students might draw a frame and spend some time putting dots down on the page. They might put dots down on the page and then pass the book to their partner, so trading with each other that one person's doing the dots and then the next person is actually coming up with the rules for how they're putting them together. But it's a really great practice in thinking about how to create your own constraints. It's also a great way to just dive into your sketchbook and make something pretty quickly. So a really good warm-up to get something created that can look interesting, and then go ahead and move on to your next thing.